Welcome into another episode of Tailgate Talk SEC. I am Will Thomas, and today I wanted to go through the SEC teams that are under the most pressure. Not even necessarily the highest expectations, although expectations do come with pressure, but really just the schools that kind of have to get it done this year, right? And if they don't, you get a lot of uncomfortable conversations. Now, before we just get into it, I've got 5 teams here, I believe. Yeah, I got 5 teams who I think are under the most pressure this year. Before we hop into it, if you have been enjoying all of this preseason content and you want even more of it as the season begins, follow me on Twitter at WillThomasCFB and then Tailgate Talk SEC everywhere else. Make sure you subscribe here. Follow on TikTok. I'm pumping this stuff out every single day. It's the greatest sport on the planet and it deserves to be covered that way. So let's get straight into it. And the first team under the most pressure, I think, is decently obvious, right? And it's Texas. I mean, Steve Sarkisian is getting a rap, fair or not, I'm not necessarily sure that it is fair, of not being able to win the big game. And the reason why I don't think it's fair is because Ryan Day couldn't do it either. Kirby Smart couldn't do it either. Kurt Cignetti sure as hell hadn't done it before. But then they were able to cross that bridge and get it done. So just because a coach hasn't done it before does not mean that they can't. I think that Sark can, but it better be this year, right? Because last year he had all the hype. That seemed to get a little bit out of control, but you missed the playoff entirely, right? The beginning of the year wasn't very good. You had that bad loss to Florida. Now this year, you are out of excuses, right? Because you have one of the best quarterbacks in the country, one of the best running back duos in the country, one of the best receivers in the country, an offensive line that's got multiple NFL profiling players on it, best edge rusher in the country, best linebacker out of the portal, one of the best corners out of the portal in Bo Masco. There's not a weakness on this Texas roster, and that's great. But what it also comes with, the potential drawback of that is if you don't get it done. Now, I'm not even saying natty or bust, but this has got to be at least a semifinal appearance. And if they do fall short there, it better be for a good reason. This has to be the year for Sark in Texas, just because of the financial investment and just the basic expectations of that program. Now, if they go 9-3 again and miss the playoff, I don't think you see a new coach in Austin next year. But you're probably at that point, then you're officially at that line of like, look, this either needs to get done or we're going to have a bad conversation. And Texas' schedule this year is very hard. So it's going to be very difficult for Texas, regardless of their roster talent, their coaching pedigree, all that, to, make sure they get to that 10-win mark and make the playoff. It's going to be hard. I think they can do it. But it's a lot of pressure for Texas this year to really get it done this season because they're out of excuses. Right? You're several years into this thing with Sark, with Arch Manning now, with all this talent, this level of investment. It has to get done. Now, the second team I want to talk about here in the most pressure, I don't necessarily even know if I agree with this sentiment, but it's kind of the public perception, so that's why I want to throw them in there. But Alabama and Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer following Nick Saban, right, being the guy who has to follow, they say the guy, being the guy who follows the guy is always a bad gig. Being the guy who follows the greatest to ever do it is even worse. And so obviously, Bama hasn't won a championship under DeBoer. They haven't made it around the playoff necessarily under DeBoer. So people are talking about how, he's not fit for this job. The Bama of old is gone. This is a new age Alabama that just can't get it done. It's not true. Right, because you look at last season, Bama couldn't run the ball, they could barely pass block, and DeBoer still led them to a 10-win season, an SEC title game appearance, and a playoff win. Bad coaches couldn't do that. Kalen DeBoer is a really, really good coach, but there is still that pressure around Alabama, around Tuscaloosa, just the expectations of that program of we need to get to Atlanta, we need to go be a semifinal team, we need to be right there to win the SEC. So that stuff is there. And, this season you're going to have a first-year quarterback, who I believe will be Keelan Russell, a bunch of youth. The defense should be really, really good, though. So I think for Bama, the expectation, again, has to be a playoff berth. That's where I have them. I have them going 10-2 and making the playoffs. So even though I don't necessarily agree with that amount of pressure being put on Kalen DeBoer and Alabama at this point, because, frankly, I think they've done a really good job up until now, that still existed because of the standard at Alabama and what was set before them. Team number 3 here, under the most pressure this fall, I think are the Oklahoma Sooners. And part of that is because of this pattern that Venables has been in, right? 4 years in, 10 wins, 6 wins. Or, excuse me, all around. 6 wins, 10 wins. 6 wins, 10 wins this last season. You got to break that, you have to break that system. Now, I'm not saying that I believe that pattern's going to hold true, but it's just, can you stack elite seasons, I guess I should say. And looking at last season, right, with John Mateer's hand injury, not being able to really run the ball, but having a defense of that caliber, even though they did, they won 10 games, they went to the playoff, I think if you played that season out in the simulation 100 times, they only win 10 games like 10% of the time. Just because of how many close, low scoring games they had to play, how many one score wins they had, how really ineffective and one dimensional that offense was. That is not that's not a replicable season. You can't follow that script again this year and expect the same results. So you need to have serious growth on the offensive side of the ball. Now, if Mateer is healthy, you get there. The receiver room, I think, is probably deeper this year. You have Xavier Robinson, Torrey Blaylock there to run the ball again with an, in theory, upgraded offensive line. The offense should be better. One of my questions for Oklahoma is on the defense. I know it'll be a good unit, right? As Venables, tons of talent. You look at last year, they held a lot of teams to low points, to low scoring games. They were a bunch of not great offenses, right? And then you look at what Ole Miss did to them in Norman. A lot of points. Bama, even though, block, punt, pick six added some of that, a good bit of points for Bama in that playoff game. Against some of the better offenses with elite athletes, they kind of gave up a standard amount of points. Can that defense take the jump this year to when you play against a really good offense, you hold them to 21 or 24? Right, and just take pressure off of John Mateer. So why have Oklahoma, in this pressure bubble is just because the Venables roller coaster, it just kind of can't keep staying that way. He has to prove he can stack elite seasons. And this year, you have continuity at quarterback, at OC. You return so much defense. You have to be able to, I'm not even saying make the playoff again this year. But you have to, you can't take that step back that we've seen after 10-win seasons in the past with Venables in Norman. So as long as they avoid taking that step back, I think it will be a good season. Success is probably still a playoff berth for the Sooners at this point. But I have Oklahoma here as a team under the most pressure just because you have to break that mold and you really have to make a lot of improvements because if your team is the same as last year, even though the schedule might not be as murderous, even though it's still hard, you cannot win 10 games again with that same formula. Now, here's the only one on this list that's really hot seat reasons, and that's South Carolina. Shane Beamer as the Gamecocks coach there. They're under pressure here because you have more or less the exact same core of players. Excuse me, you pretty much do, as you did in 2024 when they won 9 games and almost made the playoff. Then last season, they took a step back. They took a big step back. And now, if the step was just, we're just not quite knocking on the door of the playoff again, but yeah, we won a handful of SEC games, we went to a decent bowl, that'd be different. Going 4-8 and looking helpless, right? Even though you did have some close games against A&M, against Bama, you couldn't close either of those out. That's much more concerning. So we have a new OC there in Columbia for Lenore Sellers. You have an offense that I believe has more passing weapons. The running game's a question mark to me at running back, but then defensively, I think you unlock more of Dylan Stewart, ideally with his health, right? If his back is all good, and Caleb Herring there on the edge with him. Carolina, I think their roster is supplemented better around those 3 stars, right, in Sellers, Harbor, and Stewart, to go win some more of those games. So, do I think that Beamer and Carolina have to go 9-3 or 10-2 to sort of relieve that pressure? I don't. But you got to at least go 7-5, right? You have to be comfortably in a bowl game. You have to, go punch up and beat a team that maybe you were 7-point dogs against in the SEC. Because frankly, Carolina is going to have the better quarterback in 10 or more of the games they play this year. So when that is a pretty static fact, you have to go be able to pull some upsets, relying on your quarterback advantage and just having, elevated games, great performances from your supporting cast. So, I mean, the line for Beamer to keep his job probably isn't that high, but you do also have to factor in the fact that Lenoris is probably gone after this year. So is Dylan Stewart. So is Nick Harbor. So not only does Beamer have to go win a good bit of games, but he has to show a legitimate plan for the future because he's losing a lot of what has led to his success in Columbia. And that's been the recruitment and retention of Sellers and Stewart and Harbor, those guys. He pulled in some good pieces, but when we get to the end of this year, if Carolina's 7-5, yeah, that was a fine season, but then all of a sudden you need a new quarterback, you need a new defensive superstar, you got to replenish a bunch of weapons on the offense. He's going to really have to be able to show either young development or he's going to have a massive portal class to really keep heat off his back. So Carolina's on the one of those teams for that reason under the most pressure. And this last one, I almost didn't include, right? So I don't have any other first-year head coaches on this list because generally speaking, under the first year, pressure isn't the right word as much as expectations, right? Even if they're high. I put Lane Kiffin and LSU on this list. And it's just because of a lot of this is because of the spectacle that was the coaching carousel with Lane, right? All the drama that went between, is he going to stay at Ole Miss? Maybe he'll go to Florida. Nope, now it's LSU's to lose, and then they got him. You have all of that. You have all this financial investment in this roster, one of the most expensive rosters in the entire country. You kind of, they like Sam Levitt at quarterback. It's not a secret he was not one of their first two options. They had Sorsby on campus before him. They checked in on Lenore Sellers. They picked up the phone for Darian Mensah. They had other names they wanted before Sam Levitt. So now that you fall onto Sam Levitt, the pressure's kind of on like, all right, you need to make it work, right? Because if you're laying Charlie Weis, quarterbacks don't fail in your system. Can you make this work with a guy that was not one of your first couple of options? Now, defensively, that should be a pretty known commodity. I think the defense is chock full of talent on all three levels. My only worry is the secondary pieces behind those elite starters, but the defense should be very good. So then if you just have to rely on your offense to be solid and consistent, that's something you feel really good about with Lane Charlie Weis. But that's what leads to the pressure. Because Lane's a first-year head coach at LSU, it feels so much different than every other first-year coach in the SEC, for obvious reasons, right? Because he's coming from another SEC program. He has all of this commitment financially, and from the fans, the support, all that. It's got to be a good year. Now, I am not even remotely near the title game or bust expectations that some people have pushed. I think if they don't make the playoff, it's not the end of the world, but you're going to have a lot of people acting like it is. If LSU goes 8-4, maybe 9-3 and misses the playoff, the reactions are not going to be, calm. They're going to be pretty intense about how, Lane made a mistake going to LSU, especially if Ole Miss goes back to the playoff. That'll be a pretty good day on Twitter. But the expectations on LSU are high and rightfully so. I think this year you're probably looking at, can we make the playoff or can we just win 9 games? Because it is still year one. Like I said, it feels different with Lane at LSU than other year one coaches, but it is still the first year for Lane at this program. It's not title game or bust. It's just not. But there is still pressure on Lane, on LSU, and on that team to look like the team that they should be, right? Based on the portal talent, all that financial investment, and the coaching pedigree on that squad. So that'll do it. Those are the 5 SEC teams I think are under the most pressure heading into 2026. If you think I missed one or think I put someone on this list incorrectly, let me know down in the comments. But like I said at the beginning of this video, right, subscribe to me here, follow me on Twitter. I'll be doing college football content every single day up until kickoff and right through the entire season. So I've been Will Thomas, and thank you so much for watching this episode of Tailgate Talk SEC.